Okay, again, welcome to our class on Making
Yes.
Peace, a strategic guide for
Mhm.
achieving lasting peace in Israel. We're looking at chapter 11, and this is a very fascinating chapter because we've had this whole conversation about how important it is for Israel to stand strong, stand proud, and be self-sufficient as much as possible, but to be not give in, to make sure that we protect Jewish lives living in the Holy Land, right?
Mhm.
So the quotes that are at the beginning of this chapter, one is from Hosea, which is Assyria will not save us, which is, and again, one of those things when you think your allies are going to step in to help you, don't always count on that, right? And then
Mhm.
also a quote from Yirmiyahu, from Jeremiah, that says, seek the welfare of the city that I have exiled you to, and pray to God on its behalf, for in its peace you will have peace. So there's this responsibility to have gratitude to the place, to the country that hosts us, and at the same time, don't become overly reliant. And that's going to be the topic of the conversation here. And it's a challenging juggling act because there have been numerous times in Israel's recent history where Israel desperately needed American support, but America gave that support with conditions, and those conditions made it almost like fighting with one hand tied behind your back. Right? You can fight, but you can't win. So,
Yeah.
so what we're
Mhm.
going to look at tonight is reviewing the whole relationship between Israel and the United States. To what degree is Israel a vassal state, in a sense, dependent, right? And how much of it
Mhm.
is truly independent. So that's what we
Mhm.
want to look at here. And I'm going to focus mostly on some of the comments from the Lubavitcher Rebbe in analyzing this situation and reminding everyone to the Rebbe is reminding everyone to pay attention to the bigger picture. Don't get caught up in the moment. Take a look at the bigger picture and be aware of what's really going on, right? So America has provided over $150 billion in defense aid to Israel since Six Day War in 67. U.S. Air Force and Navy offer a deterrent, making hostile powers think twice before attacking. 2023, the Israel Hamas war, U.S. deployed two carrier strike groups to the Middle East, and they helped defend Israel. In April of 2024, when Iran launched an unprecedented attack on Israel, the largest drone attack in history, 170 drones, 30 cruise missiles, 120 ballistic missiles. It was a U.S. led coalition to aid Israel in downing those projectiles before they even came in. So there's no question about the tremendous aid that America gives to Israel. There's no question about that. In fact, President Joe Biden visited Israel at the beginning of the more recent war, despite mounting international pressures, and that served as a symbol of U.S. commitment to its allies' security. But in the same sense, it also sometimes comes with pressure for military restraint. So since the Yom Kippur War in 1973, this pressure has taken on various forms, including urging ill-fated peace negotiations, land concessions, premature ceasefires, and all of these essentially block Israel from being able to have decisive victories that would therefore scare off further offenses. If you can't have a decisive victory, then you're still a target. Right? You're still a target
Mhm.
until you prove unequivocally you can't defeat us and don't even try. So yes,
Mhm.
it gets the support, but don't win. So that puts us in a very compromising situation. So how should Israel conduct itself in a sense of defending its own, not only defending the moment, but establishing that we're not to be messed with versus the need for American support. So one of the first things that Ebba points out that we must never forget is that in any ally situation, every country is going to do what's best for that country. That's its job. A government is there to defend its people. So to think that America would do anything that's not in its best interest is foolish. America is allies with Israel because it's in America's best interest to be allies with Israel. And we're going to look at the idea that the best ally is a strong ally. If you're a wimpy ally, then you're always needing Big Brother's help. Then you become a liability, right? So how do you wage, how do you present yourself as a very strong ally, but at the same time, don't get lost. One of the things that Ebba pointed out very carefully years ago, that Kissinger is America's Secretary of State. He's not Israel's. He will do what he believes is best in America's best interests, and we saw that clearly, right? So remember that your allies' first responsibility is for themselves, to be aware of that. So again, Israel has to stand strong and tall for what it needs, never put itself at risk unnecessarily, and at the same time be able to maintain the relationship so they can continue to get support from a stronger partner. There's a quote from the Rebbe: the Israeli politicians, these Jews lack the strength and pride that should be inherent in every member of the Jewish people. When such a Jew sees a Gentile smiling at him, he completely loses his composure and is ready to do anything to please. In exchange for a mere smile or even a half a smile from the Gentile, he's prepared to endanger 3.5 million Jews, regardless of the consequences. So in other words, Israeli parliamentary people don't get so caught up in American pleasures, an American a nod, that you lose track of your responsibility to protect your people. If Israel wants a place in the international stage and desires that nations respect it, then it must be strong by their standards. Nations do not rush to make peace with those they perceive as weak and powerless. So every time Israel makes a concession, it doesn't bring peace closer. Every concession weakens the conceding side. When Israel refuses to yield, the other parties involved in the conflict will concede, since they're in greater need of resolution than Israel. So we have to Israel has to stand strong and tall and not bow down to pressures that put their people at risk. Again, all of this from the very beginning, it's all about pekuach nefesh, the commandment to safeguard life. All of this comes back to safeguarding the lives of Jews in Israel, everyone in Israel. So we have to stand strong in order to be a strong ally, and a strong ally that is constantly compromising and bending to please others is not a strong ally. Strong ally is one that stands up for what they feel is right and won't bow to the pressure. So, for example, the Rebbe talked about, we receive all of the arms already promised by the United States, and we will receive all the arms already promised by the United States, and even more than promised, when we make it clear that this matter of security is not up for discussion. It's not negotiable. We must state this clearly. This position is not our own idea, theory, or desire. It is rooted in a divine promise found in the Torah and God, not the U.S., as the source of our strength. As the Torah tells us, God is the one who gives you might, and this is what God said in the Holy Torah, in the Bible, which is accepted by the entire world. So we have to say that what's in our best interest is that's what we hold to, and we stick with that. Israel's welfare is the United States' best interest. Israel acts as a frontline defense against America's enemies, such as Iran and Syria, as well as the hostile countries and non-state actors throughout the Middle East who want the U.S. to fail. If we look at the speeches of U.S. presidents, we see a persistent theme. A strong Israel is necessary to counter Syria and Iran's influences. These countries oppose the U.S. no less than they oppose Israel, and perhaps even more because it's the world power. So we have to be strong and not give in to the pressures. When any time that comes to potential pikuach nefesh, a sacrificing of life, even the perceived weakness ends up costing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to interrupt, but this is so current. You kind of can't not reflect on, does that really apply? I mean, what's going on right now is that obviously Israel had to make concessions in this peace plan to get the hostages back, and right now they're stuck trying to figure out what to do next. So this is extremely current.
Yep, absolutely, and as hard as it might be, and we've talked about this before, but by negotiating with terrorists to get back out those of our people they took hostage, we have essentially said, yeah, you can do it again. We'll do everything we can to deal with terrorists in order to get the hostages back. It works. Whereas you see in other places in the world, people don't take hostages because, go ahead, kill them. We're good. We're not going to deal with it. And if you remember, as I do, there used to be a time when Israel would not discuss with terrorists, right? Of course, Entebbe is always a favorite example.
That's what I was going to mention. Right?
So we played that we would have a discussion with the terrorists, but in the meantime, we took care of it, right? In a military fashion. But that action for years stood strong as don't mess with Israel, because you're going to lose, right? But as soon as we started negotiating again and bending over, so now we get stuck, right? So the challenge is, if you're a politician and you want to get reelected, so how do you not do everything you can to get hostages home?
Lie.
Yeah.
Right? So most people have this short-term memory that they think that, if we'll do the negotiations now, so we'll get our hostages back, we'll be good, right? No, because what you're essentially doing is inviting it to happen again. But it's a very hard stance to take.
In the context here, we don't need to elaborate on it, but the Israeli government had to back down when Trump said, stop attacking Hamas. And they stopped to accept that first step in the peace process. And now they're stuck. And now they don't know where to go from here. So this is.
But what they're doing now, though, is, listen, if Hamas does something that's considered a violation of the accord, the truce, Israel attacks. Israel has attacked them after the ceasefire. Whenever they've done this, they still attack. Ceasefire is still there. But if someone does something to violate, you punish me. You just don't sit there and say, oh, okay, we're going to sit on our hands. You have to do something.
That's absolutely right. And the ceasefire is about to break.
Yeah.
Because Hamas is not going to stop.
So the Deba's, I believe the Deba's point is, that even when America, we're going to come to that more detail, but even when America says, you must not do this, you have to have a ceasefire, right? If Israel would say, thank you for your suggestion, we're not doing that, we're going to finish this campaign, right? Then what would be America's response?
Well, they tried that. That was the first reaction. That's exactly what happened.
Historically, the end result is a slap on the hand, but America needs you as an ally. So there'll be a little consequence, but at the end of the day, they're not going to walk away because America needs Israel as an ally in the Middle East. But Israel is so afraid of standing strong that they back down every time. And it costs lives again and again.
Well, but as you said, they were backing down in the face of domestic political pressure as well as
Yes,
Mhm.
what we're talking about today.
right.
Mhm.
So no politician stands a chance because, you know, the public's memory is short and they want what they want now without thinking about the consequences of that.
Mhm.
You know, I've said for years, any American president that would actually seriously tackle the deficit would never be reelected.
Mhm.
And the funny part to me is I think of Arizona, right? Arizona had a number of years ago, Arizona passed laws about um, traffic cameras at streetlights. And if you go through a red light or you turn right, you're going to get a ticket.
Mhm.
Well, it worked. It really worked. And so they voted that out, and all the cameras had to come down.
Mhm. Yeah, cool.
So there's the same thing, right? It's like we're so worried about the goodwill that we don't stand up, or we're so worried about getting the hostages back now that we lose track of what that's going to pay for, what's going to cost in the future. Politics, right?
Mhm.
The other thing that Rebbe says to keep in mind is that within American government politics, yes, you have the president, but there are so many other factors going on also that have to be considered, right? So to understand the whole geopolitical chess game going on, right? So the Rebbe talked about true peace can reign only when it's based on the goodwill of both parties. The Rebbe said, I see no reason for the Arab neighbors to want true peace, as it would
Mhm.
entail definitely relinquishing both recently acquired conquered territories and territories conquered decades ago. Similarly, it will be difficult for them to accept that the Jewish people live in the land of Israel, have every right to live there unconditionally. They're not going to accept that. They're not going to accept that. And in fact, the Rebbe points out that the constant state of war and tension in the region actually serves the local Arab states' interests as well as the Palestinians. Because if there was peace was actually happens, well, there goes all their funding.
Mhm.
It's their interest to create this situation where international attention is sending them money and concerned about them. So it's not in their interest to actually have peace. So how can you arrange a peace situation when one side is not even interested? And then
Yeah.
he says, Nevis is also here. Additionally, and perhaps even more significant point, some powers outside the Middle East, especially major ones like the US and Russia,
Mhm.
seem to have a vested interest in perpetuating tension in the region and ensuring that it remains divided among several people, several regimes, several kingdoms. The fragmented geopolitical landscape opens the door for foreign powers, US and Russia, to
Mhm.
influence and even dominion by aligning themselves with one of the factions. But if peace were to prevail amongst the local people, it would reduce the potential for foreign powers to assert control.
Mhm.
So we stop and realize why they're invested in what's going on, why they part of it. We realize that it's not to our advantage. By ensuring that no single country in the region becomes too powerful, the foreign actors can exert control and shape the outcome to their advantage. Now, despite all the bad news and all the signs that say, okay, there's no way to get out of this. It's absolute mess, right? So the Rebbe said that the Jewish people should never despair. The Jewish people's entire existence for generations, including the present situation in the Holy Land,
Mhm.
completely transcends natural order. By all economical and political standards, such a small and weak nation should not exist let alone occupy a position like it does now.
Mhm.
It's fascinating because it has always been this case for centuries with Egypt back in the time of our slavery there, with Assyria, with Babylon, Greece, and Rome. There's this little country that's in the middle of Europe and Asia and Africa, that is that small that joins those, and it has been the focus of fights all the time. It's this tiny little spot. It gets a disproportionate amount of attention from the world than it ever should. But we continue to exist because it's all on God.
Mhm.
The land of Israel is described as having the eyes of the Lord your God upon it from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. God's always watching over this land.
Mhm.
Behold, the guardian of Israel neither sleeps nor slumbers. So we get that support that God is always taking care of us, and he will continue to protect his people in Israel from all the troubles and distress. The more the foundation of the existence of the people of Israel, a single nation of the land, is based on living daily life according to the teachings of the Torah given by the one God, then the more security the Holy Land will have, culminating in the fulfillment of the divine promise, and you shall dwell securely in your land, and I will make peace in all of your land. You shall lie down with none to frighten you. So the Rebbe's take is that if we will be devoted to God, God will be devoted to us, and we will be strengthened. But if we're not, we're not, right?
Mhm.
We have that divine protection, but we have to have gratitude and an awareness of it. So the more we focus on the supernatural nature of our existence, that we are close to God, and we have to demonstrate that closeness to God, that brings on the extra divine blessings. And I think we've talked about it before, but the campaign, there was a cute video clip I saw the other day. It was artificial clip, but the Chabad International Rabbis Conference was in Brooklyn just recently, and you had 6,000 rabbis, Chabad rabbis from all over the world, all came in for the national conference, and they take a picture. I remember years ago when it was just a couple of hundred of us on that on that stand, right? Literally now it's 6,000 people on in the picture trying to get a picture together. It's an hour-long process to get everybody seated in the place. So someone made a video clip of all 6,000 rabbis standing there, and some Jewish guy coming saying, "Hey, I didn't put on tefillin today," and 6,000 rabbis made fun. But that campaign of putting on tefillin began before the 6-Day War. For the months leading up, and we lived through those times. If you remember how stressful it was really, really a concerning time, and it looked very dire. And the Rebbe's campaign was about helping people put on tefillin. What's the idea? The world is in such a crazy situation in a negative way. The world is in such a crazy situation in a negative way that to counterbalance that, we've got to do crazy things in a holy way. So it's never been done in Jewish history that you go out on the streets and you say, "Hey, are you Jewish? Have you put on tefillin today? Come, we'll put on tefillin," right? That's never happened. 3,000 years. That's not a thing, right? But the world got so crazy that Rebbe said we need to do crazy, the opposite extreme too. We need to be crazy to help Jews do more Torah and mitzvahs, to be closer to God, so that divine protection will kick in. So every time we do put on tefillin and God's name is called upon us, the enemy will fear us. Every time we light Shabbos candles, we add more light into the world. These are things we connect with God that bring God's divine attention down to us and God's divine protection. So we have to be strong enough to say, Israel has to be strong enough to say that God is my shepherd. I'm not worried about the rest. We'll work with you politically for what's in everyone's best interest. But when you're asking something that is, in a sense, suicidal, that's actually going to cost Jewish lives, no, we're not doing that. It's not negotiable. And if we would stand up and we say that's not negotiable, then we might get a proverbial slap on the hand, but at the end of the day, our allies are still going to be allies because it's in their best interest. So we have to have that strength and that fortitude. And there's some very interesting examples of this in this chapter. So, for example, Suez Canal, the Suez Crisis in 1956, right? Some years after Israel's initial retreat from the Suez Canal, the United States questioned why Israel had acquiesced so readily, implying that Israel should have mounted greater resistance. The United States needed to threaten Israel with sanctions for the sake of performative politics, but it had expected that Israel would not yield to those threats. Had we not, we might still be there. Similarly, Israel's withdrawal from the Suez had disastrous consequences. The rationale behind the decision, avoiding American sanctions and receiving American aid, is almost kind of like burning down your house to collect the insurance money. How does that really make any sense? Right? So, but if you're afraid, then you acquiesce. And we mustn't be afraid. We must know that at the end of the day, God protects. Another example, Camp David Accords, 1978. The Rebbe argues that Sadat's advocacy for Palestinian rights was a matter of political optics rather than a genuine concern. Sadat attempted to project the image of a strong leader championing the Palestinian people on behalf of the Arab world rather than a sincere desire to secure their autonomy. And of course, as history plays out, right? Sadat, the Rebbe said, Sadat will make big demands, but we should not be concerned. This is the nature of negotiations. One puts forth ambitious demands that exceed what they realistically anticipate receiving to create room for negotiations. Moreover, all of Sadat's demands, beyond what he seeks for his own country, it's all mere lip service. Given that the other Arab countries oppose his decision to visit Israel to begin with, he is politically beholden to advocate the Palestinian cause. However, helping the Palestinians does not advance his interest, and it may actually weaken his position. Therefore, if Israel were to respond politely and firmly that they cannot cede land because doing so would endanger Jewish lives, Sadat would be pleased, as this would provide him with the political coverage he needs while allowing him to focus on securing the concessions that are actually in the interest of Egypt. If we see the bigger political picture and we realize that, we have to be, bigger powers have to, play hard, but if you stand back, you're good to go. They talked about the U.S. and the USSR as exerting their pressure on Israel was insincere. The push for Israeli concessions primarily stems from the pressure placed upon the U.S. and Russia by Syria and Lebanon. So the same holds true for demands regarding the so-called Palestinians. The nations of the world only care about the Palestinians to the extent that the Arab countries have made them an issue. In reality, these nations do not care about the Palestinians, and they're interested in access to the Arab countries' vast oil reserves. It's about the oil. They don't care about the Palestinians. They care about pleasing the Arab nations to bring down the prices of the gas to make it more affordable. So if we would realize and we would display strength and confidence, Judea and Samaria are not negotiable. Ceding that land would jeopardize the lives of Jews in Jerusalem and Bnei Brak, Hadara, Haifa, Tel Aviv, all of Israel's primary cities. The international community will ultimately accept our position and even be pleased. They will have fulfilled their obligation to advocate for the Palestinians, and we will have done ours by defending our interests. And with this understanding, we can all look forward to a world of peace and proceed in harmony. But you have to stand up. They have to state their case. We have to stand up and say, no, not happening. Foreign nations act out of self-interest. It's not about altruism. There's an interesting point that Rebbe talked about. One of Carter's key motivations advancing the Camp David Accords was to secure a significant foreign policy victory that would bolster his chances of winning the upcoming presidential election. He didn't care what it was, as long as they walked away with a treaty signed. He didn't care what the conditions of the treaty were. You all work out that, right? You all work out that part of it, as long as you sign a treaty of some kind.
Yeah.
Well, at that time, the one who stands to lose the most was Carter. Egypt would get whatever it could get out of the discussion. Israel would lose only as much as it's willing to lose, and that would be it. But the pressure from Carter was all because the one who stands to lose the most was Carter. He had put himself out that he could fulfill and broker a deal, and then if he couldn't do that, then he's the one who's going to look worse. Egypt wouldn't change, Israel wouldn't change. So we have to consider why each nation is doing and saying what it does, and how sincere is that? And even is that coming from the president or the State Department? You have to figure all these pieces out. And even those things that were promised by the Camp David Accords, the U.S. didn't actually fulfill them. So that leads us to the next question. Can Israel truly rely on America for security? We look at the Suez Canal, the Suez Crisis, right? In 1956, during the Suez Crisis, the Eisenhower administration warned Egypt any attempt to blockade the straits would be considered an act of aggression. And that actually was promulgated in the Eisenhower Doctrine of 1957. But in 1967, just like a decade later, Egypt once again imposed a blockade on the straits. However, the U.S., under the leadership of Lyndon Johnson, advised Israel to refrain from taking any military action, highlighting the unpredictable nature of American foreign policy. So, can Israel truly rely on America for security? And then let's look at America's history. 1972, Richard Nixon went to visit China. People's Republic of China started developing diplomatic relationships, which led to an establishment of the diplomatic relationships in 1978, which meant that U.S. was now recognizing the People's Republic of China and not Taiwan. Therefore, the defense treaty with Taiwan was now muted. So, how long is that? How long can we trust, right? We could talk about Vietnam. We could talk about Iran in 1979. We could talk about the Kurdish forces in northern Syria, 2019, Afghanistan, 21. These all demonstrate U.S. support for its allies is not absolute and can abruptly be withdrawn when circumstances change. So Israel has to be aware of its own security interests, even if doing so may lead to a reduction in U.S. aid. But the trade-off is necessary, as relying too heavily on the U.S. Support could lead Israel into very dire existential crisis. So there's that balance act you have to walk, right? The balance between, hey, we want to work with you, America, and we appreciate all your support. But when you ask us to do something which is going to cost Israeli lives, no, it's not negotiable. So what do we do? How do you remain independent? So the Rebbe advises strategic partnerships. Israel cannot view itself as a mere client state of the U.S. Israel has to diversify its diplomatic relationships, start broadening who we connect with. The Rebbe encouraged Israel to cultivate ties with major global powers such as Russia and China to reduce its dependency on any single nation. Yes, Israel should work with the U.S., but what's that thing about don't put all your don't put all your eggs in one basket?
One basket,
Right? If we even look now about the regional powers, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, developing other relationships so that we're not dependent solely on the U.S. But Rebbe also discussed this regarding sourcing weapons, diversify the military source. Do you all remember the Levi fighter jets? Israel was creating the world's most advanced fighter jet, and this process had gone through various stages of development and testing, showcasing Israel's technological prowess. However, Israel ultimately scrapped the program because of pressure from the U.S. Because if Israel made the best fighter jet around, number one, they wouldn't buy American ones. So that affects American economy. Number two, other countries that buy American products might turn to Israel for their product. So because of American economic pressure, for economic reasons, Israel backed off. Is that in Israel's best interest? Or are we just cowering to a major power? And how do we defend our stance? If we stand strong, how do we defend our stance? It's actually quite simple. Pekuach nefesh, the sanctity of saving lives. Israel should never do anything that will jeopardize Jewish lives, whether that's dealing with terrorists to get hostages back or canceling their fighter jet program. All of these things essentially create an environment where Israel becomes more and more dependent on the U.S. and it doesn't secure a good solid Israel. And by the way, every time we acquiesce to pressure, America is more and more convinced that we're not actually a strong ally because we crumble to everything that's asked. Briefly, Israel's nuclear program. The U.S. tried to tell, again, like the Levi fighter jets, U.S. tried to, and other countries, deter Israel from pursuing nuclear ambitions, and Israel said, nope, we're doing this. And what happened? Oh, okay. We stood fast, and then others came to also ask about our technology as they developed theirs. When it came to Saddam Hussein's nuclear projects, Israel must prioritize its own security interests. The international community cannot be relied upon to protect Israel. They'll turn a blind eye. The United States puts its perceived interests ahead of Israel's interest, even if doing so may jeopardize Israeli security and Jewish lives. Israel can afford to look out for its own interests, since international American condemnation is often more performative than substantive. They have to say, don't do that, so that they look good in the international eyes. But once we do it anyway, okay. And in retrospect, we see that the United States has actually come to appreciate Israel's actions. Iraqi nuclear power, which they clearly had Brands and Palki document Saddam's chilling vision of a war against Israel in an essay backed by copious citations from Saddam's meetings. And they write, on March 27, 1979, Saddam Hussein, the de facto ruler and soon-to-be president of the Ba'athist Iraq, laid out his vision for a long, grinding war against Israel in a private meeting of high-level Iraqi officials. Iraq, he explained, would seek to obtain nuclear weapon from our Soviet friends, use the resulting deterrent power to counteract Israeli threats of nuclear retaliation, and thereby enable a patient war, a war of attrition, that would reclaim Arab lands, according to him, all of Israel. And as Saddam put it, nuclear weapons would allow Iraq to guarantee the long war that is destructive to our enemy and take it at our leisure, each meter of land, and drown the enemy with rivers of blood. Quote, Saddam's envisioned that this war would cost Iraq some 50,000 casualties, to say nothing of Israeli losses. So Israel acted. We didn't seek permission. We acted. And American counseled restraints. And in the end, Israel went in. F-16s were equipped with two 2,000-pound bombs. Upon reaching the reactor, the pilots initiated a well-choreographed bombing run, severely damaging the reactor and rendering it non-operational. Miraculously, the mission was completed without any Israeli casualties. All the aircraft returned safely to Israel. Obviously, the international world was, how could you? Terrible. In retrospect, despite the wave of global condemnation, the sitting U.S. President, Ronald Reagan, privately sympathized with Israel. Showing his positive sentiments for Israel, Reagan confided in his diary on June 10th that if Congress found that Israel had indeed violated the agreement, I'll grant a presidential waiver. Iraq is technically still at war with Israel, and I believe they were prepared to build an atomic bomb. Nonetheless, Reagan was also personally terrified of the possible repercussions of Israel's attack, how Saddam and the Arab countries might react. In his diary, he wrote, I swear I believe Armageddon is near. So the administration has to take one stance, not necessarily do the primary players actually agree with it. But if they take that stance, they can say to the world, hey, we told them not to, and they did it anyway. And now go back to business as usual. In the aftermath of Operation Opera, Saddam redoubled his nuclear efforts. Nonetheless, Israel's operations significantly set back his progress. Again, due to time, you could talk about the first Gulf War. You could talk about the American retrospective, looking back on what Israel had done, therefore helped the U.S. during the Gulf War. So in a 2002 New York Times opinion piece, it said, even the Reagan administration, normally sympathetic to Israel, chose to condemn the attack. France declared it unacceptable. Britain denounced it as a grave breach of international law. In retrospect, the condemnations were completely wrong. Thank God Menachem Begin overrode his own intelligence agency, which worried about that the attack would affect the peace process with Egypt, and he ordered the reactor destroyed. Otherwise, Iraq would have gained nuclear weapons in the 1980s, and it might now have a province called Kuwait and a chunk of Iran, and the region might have suffered nuclear devastation. So, again, when Israel took a stand, looked after its own best interests, faced all the international condemnation and then later international appreciation for what could have been had they not done what needed to be done. Years later, Israel carried out a preemptive attack against another nuclear site, but this time the world paid much less attention. 2007, Israel and the U.S. were aware of a nuclear reactor, probably a nuclear weapon program, under development in Syria with North Korean assistance. That September, Israeli F-16s and F-15s destroyed the facility using Maverick missiles and 500-pound bombs. More than a month later, U.S. officials said the target was a partially constructed nuclear reactor. No other Arab nation criticized the raid, and the main international complaint came from North Korea. So again, if we'll set up the stance to stay strong and protect Jewish lives in the Holy Land of Israel, because God gave us that land, and we're strong in that, then yes, there'll be international condemnation. There might be some sanctions, this, the other, but at the end of the day, the world will be a better place.
And what happened when they attacked Iran? Not a peep from it. Nobody condemned it at all. Next chapter,
sometimes
totally different story.
Well,
sometimes
Iran,
the world learns from their mistakes.
yeah. Well, you know why North Korea supported Iran's position, because who would think was supplying technical and scientific and knowledge and assistance to Iran in their program? It's North Korea.
But they didn't want to be the next one to be the target.
Yeah. We better sacrifice Iran.
So I think what we're looking at here as we wrap up the idea here is that we've seen plenty of examples of when Israel does stand up, it gets reprimanded, then it gets a slap on the hand, and then we go back to business as usual. Allies are allies, nothing's gone. And we are then seen as a stronger ally. Israel's seen as a stronger ally because it doesn't back down for its own security. And as far as the international condemnation, that's going to come anyway. We've seen that. Has nothing to do with whether we do or don't do. It's going to come. But if we keep in mind that America has to do what's in America's best interest, because that's America protecting its people, or at least its perceived interests, and it may need to condemn Israel, but it's still going to be in America's best interest to have a strong Israel. So time and time again, we realize that if we see the bigger picture of how nations work and how the politics work, it is in Israel's best interest to remain strong, not to capitulate to pressure, and do what is necessary to protect Jewish lives in the Holy Land. Then we will be respected greater, and there'll be less war, and more lives will be saved on all sides. But it's up to us, it's up to America, it's up to Israel to stand strong and not cower because of fear of international condemnation. Pekuach nefesh, whatever is necessary to save Jewish lives in the Holy Land, that is the bottom line. We have to stand strong and tall for that point. Questions?